My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 69, and my own son and his wife threw me out onto the street on my birthday. Before I tell you about the multi-million-dollar secret my husband left me that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The key felt like a shard of ice in my hand, even through my thin gloves. Rain was starting to fall, a cold, miserable Chicago drizzle that soaked into the collar of my coat. I stood in front of a dilapidated garage on the south side. A place reeking of damp concrete and years of neglect. This was it. This was all I had left. Just a few hours ago, I was sitting in a plush leather chair in our family lawyer's downtown office, the kind of place with dark wood paneling and views of the lake that made you feel important. My son Kevin sat beside me, looking solemn in his expensive suit. His wife Tiffany was on his other side, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue for show. It had been 3 weeks since we buried my husband, Richard. 3 weeks of walking through our big empty house in Lincoln Park like a ghost. Mr. Davison, our lawyer for 30 years, cleared his throat. He couldn't look me in the eye. That should have been my first clue. He read through the legal jargon, his voice a low drone, until he got to the main part of the inheritance. To my son, Kevin Vance, and his wife, Tiffany Vance, he read, I bequeath our primary residence located in Lincoln Park, Chicago, along with the controlling interest in my primary investment portfolio. I felt a faint sense of relief. At least the house would stay in the family. I looked over at Kevin, expecting a shared glance of memory, of sadness. Instead, I saw a flicker of triumph in his eyes before he masked it. Tiffany squeezed his arm, a tight, possessive gesture. Mr. Davison took a sip of water. His next words felt like they were coming from a great distance. And to my beloved wife, Eleanor Vance, he continued, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. I leave the property located at 1420 Industrial Parkway. The garage and its contents. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. The garage? I remembered Richard buying it years ago, something about storing old business files. I'd never even seen it. It was just a garage. After 49 years of marriage, of building a life, of raising our son, I got a garage. The ride back to the mansion was quiet. I was too stunned to speak, lost in a fog of confusion and a grief so sharp it felt new all over again. Why would Richard do this? It made no sense. We walked through the grand double doors of the home I had decorated, the home where I'd hosted decades of Christmases, the home where I'd held Richard's hand in his final days. The air was thick with memories. Tiffany was the one who broke the silence. She dropped her purse on the marble entryway table and turned to me, her fake sympathy gone, replaced by a cold, brittle smile. A garage, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. How fitting. Now if you don't mind, Eleanor, we'd like you to pack a bag. We have designers coming tomorrow morning, and we need the space cleared. I stared at her, then at my son. Kevin? What is she talking about? This is my home. Kevin wouldn't meet my eyes. He just shrugged, a weak, dismissive gesture. The will was clear, Mom. The house is ours now. Ours. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. But where am I supposed to go? I need some time to figure things out. Tiffany stepped forward, her perfectly manicured finger pointing towards the door. You can figure it out somewhere else. I want you out. Tonight. Tonight. My voice was barely a whisper. But it's my birthday. She laughed. A short, ugly sound. Oh, please. Don't be so dramatic. She walked over to the hall closet, pulled out my favorite suitcase, the one Richard and I took to Savannah on our honeymoon, and threw it at my feet. Pack whatever you can fit. The rest will be donated. I looked at my son, my only child, pleading with my eyes. Kevin, please. He finally looked at me, but his eyes were cold, empty. The warm, loving boy I raised was gone. In his place was a stranger. Tiffany's right, Mom, he said, his voice flat. It's for the best. That's when Tiffany delivered the final blow. She leaned in close, her perfume suffocating me. You're a pathetic old woman, she hissed, her voice low so only I could hear. Richard knew your real worth. And this, she gestured around the grand foyer, was never meant for you. Something inside me broke. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I was numb. I numbly packed a few clothes, some pictures, and Richard's favorite sweater. When I came downstairs, Tiffany was waiting by the door, her arms crossed. She physically nudged me towards the exit, and as I stepped onto the porch, she threw my suitcase onto the wet pavement. It skidded and landed in a puddle. The heavy door slammed shut behind me. The lock clicked. Just like that, I was homeless. So I drove. For hours, I drove through the rainy streets of the city that was no longer my home. The words echoing in my head. Pathetic old woman. Pathetic old woman. I had nowhere to go. My sister lived in Arizona, my friends were all our friends, and I couldn't bear the shame of calling them. Then I remembered. The garage. My inheritance. Which brought me here, standing in the rain, my hand trembling as I slid the key into the rusted lock. It was a final desperate act. The ancient door groaned in protest as I pushed it open, revealing nothing but pitch-black darkness. I fumbled for the small flashlight on my keychain and switched it on. The beam, weak and shaky, cut through the gloom. My breath caught in my throat. My heart stopped dead in my chest. What I was seeing, it couldn't be real. It was impossible. The beam of my flashlight fell upon something gleaming, something massive, covered by a soft gray cloth. And it wasn't alone. My hand, shaking uncontrollably, reached out and grabbed the corner of the cover. I pulled, and the soft, heavy cloth slid away with a whisper, releasing a faint scent of wax and old leather. My flashlight beam landed on a curve of gleaming metal, a fender so perfectly shaped, so flawlessly painted in a shade of turquoise blue. It looked like a pool of liquid light in the darkness. It was a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, in pristine showroom condition. The chrome grille grinned at me like a long-lost friend. My jaw went slack. Richard and I had our first date in a car just like this one, borrowed from his father. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild rhythm. I moved to the next shape, my movements clumsy with disbelief. I pulled back the second cover. Underneath sat a beast. A 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429, painted a deep, candy apple red so rich it seemed to drink the light from my flashlight. It was pure American muscle, radiating power even while standing still. I could almost hear the roar of its engine. The third car was different. Sleeker, more elegant. When I unveiled it, a silver 1961 Jaguar E-Type was revealed. Its long classic lines, the definition of automotive grace. It was the most beautiful car I had ever seen. I stumbled back, leaning against a workbench to steady myself. This wasn't a collection. This was a treasure trove. These weren't just cars. They were works of art, icons of a bygone era. And I knew, even with my limited knowledge, that they were worth a fortune. I slowly panned my light around the rest of the space. This was no dusty, forgotten garage. The concrete floor was sealed and polished to a mirror shine. Along the walls were professional-grade tool chests and stainless steel cabinets. A modern climate control unit hummed softly in the corner, keeping the air cool and dry. This place was a high-tech sanctuary, a secret vault disguised as a ruin. Richard, my quiet, practical husband who drove a sensible Buick. What was all this? When did he do this? How? The questions swirled in my head, making me dizzy. I felt like I had stumbled into a secret life he had lived right under my nose. For a moment, a sliver of hurt pierced through the shock. Why didn't he tell me? Why keep such a beautiful, passionate secret from me? I needed to sit down. I spotted a door at the far end of the garage that I hadn't noticed before. It led to a small, clean, and surprisingly comfortable office. There was a leather sofa, a small desk, a mini fridge stocked with bottled water, and even a compact bathroom with a shower. My practical Richard. It was as if he knew I might need a place to shelter. He had thought of everything. Everything except explaining any of it. My eyes scanned the small office, trying to absorb the sheer impossibility of it all. I felt a strange mix of awe and a profound, aching loneliness. Here was this incredible secret world he had built, and I couldn't share the discovery with him. I couldn't ask him the million questions that were now screaming in my mind. I sank onto the leather sofa, the silence of the garage pressing in on me, amplifying the beat of my own confused heart. This was all mine, this unbelievable secret fortune, and yet I had never felt more alone. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a deep, hollow ache. I must have sat there for a long time just staring into the space, my mind blank. The reality of my situation started to crash down on me again. Just hours ago, my son, my own flesh and blood, had cast me out like trash. His wife had called me pathetic. And here I was surrounded by what was likely millions of dollars worth of automotive art. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I needed to get a grip. Richard was a meticulous man. He wouldn't have done all of this without a reason, without an explanation. There had to be something else. Some clue. I stood up and walked back into the main garage area, my eyes scanning every surface, every cabinet, every corner. I ran my hand along the cool metal of the Bel Air, feeling a connection to my husband, to our past. This car was a memory, a beautiful, tangible piece of our history. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't hidden. In fact, it was in plain sight, something I had overlooked in my initial shock. Taped to the wall, right next to the main light switch for the garage, was a thick cream-colored envelope. In Richard's unmistakable, steady handwriting, it simply said, "For my Eleanor." My fingers trembled so badly I could barely pull the envelope from the wall. It felt heavy, substantial. I clicked on the light switch next to it, and the entire space was suddenly flooded with bright, clean light from modern fixtures recessed in the ceiling. The cars gleamed, their polished surfaces reflecting the light like jewels. The full, breathtaking scope of what Richard had built was laid bare. And it was even more incredible than it had been in the dark. I carried the letter back to the small office, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I sank onto the sofa, took a deep breath to steady myself, and carefully broke the seal. Inside were several pages of his familiar stationery, covered in his neat architectural script. "My dearest Eleanor," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I am so sorry. I am sorry for the pain you are feeling. And I am sorry for the shock and confusion that must have led you here. Please forgive me for the secrets I had to keep. They were never meant to hurt you. They were meant to protect you." I had to stop and press my fingers to my eyes, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. His voice was so clear in my head as I read the words. 6 years ago, the doctors told me about my heart. They gave me 5 years, maybe less. I didn't tell you the full extent of it, because I didn't want our last years together to be defined by a countdown clock. I wanted us to live, not just to wait. But I knew I had to prepare. I had to make sure you would be safe, that you would be provided for in a way that no one could ever touch. I paused, my breath catching. He had known for 6 years. 6 years he carried that weight alone, shielding me from the worst of it, all while planning this. The letter continued. "Over the last decade, I watched our son change, Eleanor. The ambitious boy we raised became something harder. I saw how Tiffany's influence shaped him, how their focus shifted entirely to wealth, to status, to appearances. More than that, I saw how they began to treat you. The little dismissals, the condescending tone when they thought I wasn't listening. They started to see you not as a mother, but as a relic, an obstacle to their future inheritance. It broke my heart, but I knew I couldn't ignore it." A tear splashed onto the page, blurring the ink. He had noticed. I had always made excuses for them, telling myself Kevin was just stressed from work, that Tiffany was just from a different generation. But Richard had seen the truth. That is why I had to create this painful charade with the will. I couldn't leave our assets to you and Kevin jointly. He and Tiffany would have found a way to control it, to manage it for you, until you had nothing left but a small allowance and their condescending pity. I couldn't risk a traditional divorce in our later years by confronting him. It would have shattered what little family we had left. So I devised a test. A cruel test perhaps, but a necessary one. I left them what they value most, the mansion, the visible wealth, the status symbols. And I left you this, what they would see as worthless. What you are sitting in now, my love, is the real wealth. These 3 cars alone are worth a significant amount. You'll find contact information for my trusted advisor, Marcus Thorne, who can help you with them. But the cars are just the beginning." My eyes darted to the next line, my pulse quickening. Behind the photograph of us on the pier in Savannah, the one from our honeymoon where that seagull tried to steal your hat, there is a safe built into the wall. The combination is our anniversary. June 8, 76. Inside, you will find the truth of what I have been building for the last 6 years. This garage, Eleanor, is just the key. The real inheritance is your freedom. I looked up from the letter, my head spinning. A safe. I scanned the small office and there it was on the wall above the desk. A simple framed photo of the 2 of us, young, laughing into the camera with the Savannah coastline behind us. I rose from the sofa on unsteady legs and walked towards it. I know this is a lot to take in, the letter concluded, and I am sorry for the burden of this secret, but I had to give them the chance to show their true character. I had to know for certain if the son we raised was still in there. If he proved himself worthy, if he treated you with the love and respect you deserve, then you can choose to share this with him. But if he has shown his true colors, well, then this is my final gift to you. It is your shield, your independence, your new beginning. Live beautifully, my love. You have earned it more than anyone I know. All my love now and always, Richard. With Richard's letter clutched in my hand, I lifted the photo of us in Savannah off the wall. Behind it, just as he'd said, was the gray metal door of a wall safe, complete with a digital keypad. My fingers were still trembling as I slowly punched in the numbers. 0-6-0-8-7-6. A soft click echoed in the quiet office, and the heavy door swung open. Inside there was no cash. There were no jewels. It was filled with thick, meticulously organized binders and a series of labeled USB drives. I pulled out the top binder, a heavy leather portfolio with a simple gold embossed label, Vance Legacy Trust. I sat down at the desk and opened it. The first page was a summary of assets. I had to read it 3 times before the numbers even started to make sense. My vision swam. It wasn't possible. The number at the bottom of the page had 8 zeros in it. I flipped through the sections, my disbelief growing with every page. It wasn't just the cars. There were deeds to 2 apartment buildings in Austin, Texas, fully occupied and generating a steady monthly income. There were ownership documents for a portfolio of commercial properties in Denver, Colorado, leased long-term to stable businesses. There was a separate investment portfolio, managed by a firm I'd never heard of, filled with blue-chip stocks and municipal bonds, designed for steady, low-risk growth. Richard, the man who clipped coupons and debated for a week about buying a new lawnmower, had secretly become a real estate and investment mogul. He had built an empire, all in my name, under a living trust that had automatically become mine upon his death. It was a staggering work of financial genius, all conducted in the shadows. He had effectively separated our visible shared wealth from this vast, hidden fortune he was building just for me. Tucked into a side pocket of the binder was a separate, smaller folder. The label on it read, Charleston. Inside, I found the deed to a fully paid-for cottage in the historic district of Charleston, South Carolina. It included recent utility bills, property tax receipts, and a set of keys in a small envelope. There were even photos. It was a charming single-story home with a wide front porch and a small private garden. Exactly the kind of place I'd always dreamed of retiring to. A dream I thought had died with Richard. I leaned back in the chair, the sheer weight of it all pressing down on me. I felt a wave of dizziness. This wasn't just a safety net, this was a fortress. Richard hadn't just provided for me. He had empowered me on a scale I couldn't comprehend. He had given me a new life, a complete, independent existence free from anyone. Free from Kevin and Tiffany. The anger I had felt earlier began to curdle into a cold, hard resolve. They had called me pathetic. They had thrown me out like a piece of garbage, believing I was a penniless old woman who was now their problem. They had revealed their true, ugly natures, just as Richard had predicted. They had failed his test in the most spectacular way possible. I spent the next hour going through the rest of the safe's contents. There were bank account details, passwords, and a list of contacts. At the very bottom was another letter from Richard. Eleanor, it read. If you're this far, you've seen the full picture. My first recommendation is that you hire a lawyer. Not Mr. Davison. He's a good man, but he was our family lawyer, and his loyalties might be complicated. I've researched a woman in Chicago, Diane Albright. She's known as a shark, fiercely protective of her clients. She specializes in estate and trust litigation. You may need her. Don't be afraid to be strong. This is your life now. Don't let them take one more thing from you. Diane Albright. I repeated the name to myself. A shark. That's what I needed. I spent that night on the small sofa in the garage office. For the first time since Richard's death, I didn't cry myself to sleep. I lay awake for hours, not in grief but in thought. The shock had finally subsided, replaced by a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. My husband had armed me. He had given me a sword and a shield. and I would be damned if I didn't use them. I had a future, a home waiting for me in the sun, a life of my own. But what I didn't know, as I finally drifted off to sleep surrounded by the silent, gleaming guardians Richard had left me, was that back in the Lincoln Park mansion, my son and his wife were already on the phone with their own lawyer. Furious at the thought that there might be more to the worthless garage than met the eye, and enraged by the idea of me having any independence at all, they were already plotting a far more sinister move against me. Their greed hadn't been satisfied. It had only been inflamed. The first call I made the next morning was to Diane Albright. Her voice on the phone was exactly as Richard's note had implied. Sharp, no nonsense, and radiating competence. When I briefly explained my situation, the will, the garage, the secret trust, there was a moment of silence on the line. Then she said, "Mrs. Vance, your husband was a very clever man. Can you be in my office at 2 p.m.? My meeting with her was a blur of legal documents and strategic planning. She was a woman in her 50s with piercing blue eyes and a mind like a steel trap. By the time I left her office, I had a clear plan. She would handle the legal transfer of all assets into my active control, create a firewall around the trust, and become my official representative in all matters concerning my son." For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. The second call I made was to Marcus Thorne, the classic car advisor Richard had mentioned. He was a kind, older gentleman with a warm British accent, and he spoke of my husband with genuine affection. He confirmed the car's valuations, and the number he quoted made my head spin all over again. He assured me that he would arrange for their continued maintenance and security until I decided what to do with them. With my affairs in Chicago temporarily in the hands of my new, formidable lawyer, I did the only thing that felt right. I packed Richard's sweater and the few belongings I had into my old Toyota, left the keys to the garage with Marcus for safekeeping, and I started driving south. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just drove. The long drive was a time of transition. With every mile that passed, I felt the cold, gray shadow of Chicago and my old life receding. I was driving towards the sun, towards the home Richard had prepared for me, towards my new beginning. When I finally arrived in Charleston, it was late afternoon. The city was bathed in a golden light, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and salt water. Following the GPS, I navigated the historic cobblestone streets until I found the address from the deed. The cottage was even more charming than in the photos. It was painted a soft buttery yellow with blue shutters, tucked behind a white picket fence and a riot of climbing roses. I used the key Richard had left me, and the door swung open into a home that was so perfectly me, it took my breath away. The living room was filled with comfortable furniture, bookshelves crammed with classics, and paintings of the ocean on the walls. The kitchen was modern but cozy, with a small breakfast nook that looked out onto a private, walled garden. In the bedroom, the bed was already made with linens in my favorite shade of blue. Richard had remembered everything. He had furnished this place with my tastes, my comforts, my soul and mind. In a small study, hanging above a simple writing desk, was a watercolor painting of the pier in Savannah, a perfect replica of the photo from our honeymoon. That's when the tears finally came. Not tears of grief or anger, but tears of overwhelming love and gratitude. He had built me a sanctuary, a place to heal. A few days later, as I was tentatively tending to the roses in the front garden, a woman with a kind face and silver hair stopped at my gate. "Hello there," she said with a gentle southern accent. "I'm Margaret, your next-door neighbor. I don't mean to pry, but I saw you'd moved in. I just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." We started talking, and within minutes it felt like I'd known her for years. She was also a widow, a retired teacher with a quick wit and a warm heart. We sat on my front porch drinking sweet tea she brought over, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I had a real easy conversation. I didn't tell her my whole story, not yet. I just told her I was new in town and looking for a fresh start. She patted my hand. "Well, you've come to the right place for it, honey," she said. "This town is good at healing souls." The days turned into a week, then two. I fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings were for walks on the beach, afternoons were for exploring the city or working in my garden, and evenings were often spent on Margaret's porch talking for hours. The raw, gaping wound in my heart began to slowly, carefully, stitch itself closed. I was starting to feel happy. Just as I was finally starting to breathe again, A certified letter arrived in the mail. It was forwarded from my new P.O. box in Chicago. The return address was a prestigious law firm I didn't recognize. My hands turned to ice as I tore it open, a sense of dread washing over me. I read the first page, my vision blurring with the dense legal jargon. It took me a moment to understand. It wasn't a lawsuit for money. It was far, far worse. The heavy legal paper felt flimsy in my trembling hands. I had to read the sentence twice, then a third time before the full monstrous meaning of the words sank in. It was a petition. A petition filed in Cook County Court by my son, Kevin Vance, and his wife, Tiffany Vance. They were petitioning a judge to have me declared mentally incompetent. My breath hitched in my chest. Incompetent. The word was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I stumbled back into the cottage and sank into a chair, the letter shaking so violently I could barely focus on the print. Their argument, laid out in cold, formal paragraphs, was as cruel as it was calculated. They claimed that the sudden and tragic death of my husband had caused me to suffer a severe psychotic break. They alleged that my discovery of the cars and the trust was not a discovery at all, but a grief-induced delusion, a fantasy I had constructed to cope with being left with a meager inheritance. They had twisted my grief, the most profound and private pain of my life, into a weapon to use against me. They painted me as a confused, senile old woman, lost in a fantasy world, incapable of managing her own affairs. Their proof was a collection of lies and half-truths. A statement from a doorman at my old building saying I'd seemed disoriented and distressed in the weeks after the funeral. An affidavit from one of Tiffany's friends, a woman I'd met twice, who claimed I had been speaking incoherently at the memorial service. It was a carefully constructed fiction designed to strip me of everything. And their proposed solution? They were magnanimously offering to step in. They were petitioning the court to grant them conservatorship over my person and my estate. They would become my legal guardians. They would control my finances, my property, my medical decisions. They would control my life. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about erasure. They wanted to nullify Richard's will, nullify his final act of love and protection. They wanted to lock me away, figuratively if not literally, and take everything he had built for me. They had tried to throw me out, and when they discovered I had a safety net, they decided to cut the ropes and burn the net to the ground. They wanted to prove that Tiffany's vicious words were true, that I was, in fact, a pathetic old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own mind. The sheer, calculated evil of it was breathtaking. They would stand up in a court of law, my own son, and declare his mother insane for the sake of money. He would look a judge in the eye and testify that the grief of losing his father had broken my mind. I felt a cold rage begin to burn in my veins, so hot and fierce it scorched the grief and fear away. The woman who had cried in the garage, the woman who had felt lost and alone, was gone. Richard's letter had given me a shield. This petition, this ultimate act of betrayal, had just handed me a sword. I stood up, my back straight, the letter clenched in my fist. I walked to the phone and dialed Diane Albright's number in Chicago. Her assistant put me through immediately. "Diane," I said, my voice low and steady, devoid of the tremor I felt just moments before. "It's Eleanor Vance." "Eleanor," she replied, her tone immediately alert. "What's happened?" "They filed," I said. "They're trying to have me declared incompetent." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I feared she would tell me it was a hopeless case. But when she spoke, her voice was not filled with pity, but with a cold, controlled fury that mirrored my own. "All right," she said, and I could hear the sound of her typing furiously in the background. "The fools. They actually did it. Eleanor, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't speak to them. Don't respond to their lawyer. Don't do anything. I want you on the first flight back to Chicago tomorrow morning. We are going to fight this, and we are going to bury them." Her words were a balm to my raw nerves. I wasn't alone. I had an ally. A shark. "I'll be there," I said. After I hung up, I walked out into my small garden. The Charleston sun was warm on my face, and the sweet scent of jasmine filled the air. This was my sanctuary. This was the life Richard had wanted for me, and I would not let them take it. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my grief for instability. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten that I was Richard Vance's wife. And I was not going down without the fight of my life. The flight back to Chicago felt like a journey into a war zone. The peace and healing I'd found in Charleston evaporated as the familiar skyline of the city appeared through the airplane window. This was where my enemies were. This was where I had to make my stand. Diane Albright's office was a hive of controlled, purposeful energy. She greeted me not with a handshake, but with a thick binder that she slapped down on her conference table. "This," she said, her eyes glinting, "is our battle plan. They think this will be easy," Diane explained, pacing the room as she talked. "Their entire case is built on a stereotype. The grieving, emotional widow who loses her grip on reality. It's insulting, it's misogynistic, and we are going to use it to rip them to shreds. They've made a critical error, Eleanor. They've based their attack on your perceived weakness, but they have no idea about your actual strength, or Richard's." For the next 2 weeks, Diane's office became my command center. We worked relentlessly. Diane's team of paralegals and investigators moved with terrifying efficiency. They subpoenaed Kevin's financial records, and what they found was damning. He wasn't just an ambitious investor. He was a reckless gambler. He had a history of failed ventures, of taking out high-interest loans against his future inheritance, of living far beyond his means. He wasn't trying to protect my assets. He was desperate to get his hands on them to cover his own catastrophic financial holes. His petition wasn't an act of concern. It was an act of sheer desperation. We gathered our own evidence. I provided Diane with Richard's letter, a powerful testament to his state of mind and his intentions. We got sworn affidavits from Richard's cardiologist, confirming that while his heart was failing, his mind was as sharp as a tack until the very end. We got a statement from Mr. Davison, the family lawyer, who, under the pressure of a subpoena, confirmed that Richard had discussed his concerns about Kevin's spending habits with him on multiple occasions. Marcus Thorne, the car advisor, provided records of his meticulous, business-like dealings with Richard over the past 6 years. The man who had built that car collection was not a man lost in delusion. He was a brilliant, methodical investor. The hardest part was going through Richard's personal journals. Diane insisted it was necessary. I spent hours reading his familiar script, reliving our life together through his eyes. But amidst the memories of vacations and anniversaries, I found what we needed. He had documented his growing unease about Kevin and Tiffany. An entry from 2 years ago read, "Kevin came to me for another loan today. It's not a loan, it's a bailout. Tiffany has him convinced that they're one big deal away from their own empire. I worry he's forgotten the value of hard work, of building something slowly and carefully. I worry what will become of Eleanor if I'm not here to be her buffer." Each entry was a small piece of the puzzle, forming a clear picture of a concerned father and a loving husband, not a mentally unsound man. Every page was a dagger in the heart of their fraudulent case. Throughout it all, Diane was my rock. She was relentless, but she was also compassionate. She saw the emotional toll this was taking on me, and knew when to push and when to let me breathe. "Grief is not a weakness, Eleanor," she told me one late night as we were going through documents. "It's a sign that you loved deeply. We're not going to let them turn your love into a pathology." A preliminary hearing date was set. Kevin and Tiffany's lawyer tried to get the case fast-tracked, hoping to catch us off guard. But Diane was always one step ahead. She filed motion after motion, demanding more financial disclosures from them, burying their lawyer in paperwork. The day of the hearing arrived, a cold, gray morning. As I got dressed, I chose a simple navy blue suit. I wasn't dressing as a victim. I was dressing as the wife of Richard Vance, the executor of his true legacy. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a pathetic old woman. I saw a fighter. I walked into the courthouse, my back straight, my resolve like steel. Diane was waiting for me. We walked into the courtroom together. I saw them sitting at the plaintiff's table. Kevin was pale, looking nervously at his hands. Tiffany, however, was a picture of smug confidence. She was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking dress, and she shot me a look of pure venom, followed by a tiny triumphant smirk she shared with her lawyer. They thought they had this in the bag. They thought I would crumble. They had no idea what was coming for them. The courtroom was smaller than I expected and stuffy. The air was thick with a tense, formal silence. Judge Catherine Mills presided, a woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a reputation for having zero tolerance for nonsense. She looked over the top of her reading glasses at the parties assembled, her expression unreadable. Kevin and Tiffany's lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Hayes, began. His voice was smooth and oozed with false sympathy. He painted a tragic picture of a family in crisis. He spoke of my deep and understandable grief, and how it had led to a troubling detachment from reality. He presented the affidavits from the doorman and Tiffany's friend, trying to build a narrative of me as a confused, fragile woman. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with concern, "my clients are here today not out of greed but out of love. They are deeply worried for Mrs. Vance's well-being. They simply want to ensure she is cared for, and that the estate of the late Mr. Richard Vance is managed responsibly, as he surely would have wanted." Tiffany dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief again. Kevin just stared at the table. I sat perfectly still, my hands clasped in my lap, and I met the judge's gaze. I did not look away. Then it was Diane's turn. She stood up, and the energy in the room shifted. She wasn't smooth. She was a force of nature. "Your Honor," she began, her voice crisp and clear, "what we have just heard is a work of fiction. A disgusting, self-serving narrative designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to steal a mother's inheritance and freedom. This is not about love. This is about greed, pure and simple." For the next hour, Diane systematically dismantled their case, piece by painful piece. She called their narrative of my delusion what it was: an insult. Then she presented our evidence. She submitted the sworn testimony from Richard's cardiologist, a man with a brilliant mind, the doctor had written, who was lucid and engaged until his final day. She presented the financial records from Marcus Thorne, a meticulous and savvy investor, Marcus had stated, detailing the profitable and well-documented transactions Richard had made over 6 years. She entered into evidence Kevin's financial statements, which showed a mountain of debt and a string of failed, high-risk investments. The petitioner, Mr. Vance, Diane stated dryly, is claiming his mother is financially incompetent, when the evidence clearly shows that he is the one who has demonstrated a breathtaking lack of financial judgment. Mr. Hayes objected repeatedly, but Judge Mills overruled him every time, her eyes narrowing with growing impatience. Then Diane brought up Richard's journals. She read the entry about his concerns about Kevin's spending, about his fear for my future. Kevin sank lower in his chair, his face turning a blotchy red. Tiffany's smug expression began to falter. Finally, Diane turned to me. She didn't call me to the stand. Instead, she said, "Your Honor, my client has been through enough. She will not be subjected to a cross-examination that is designed only to humiliate her. Instead, I would like to present our final piece of evidence. A man who could not be here today, but who deserves to have his voice heard. I would like to present the last words of Mr. Richard Vance." She placed a small USB drive on the clerk's desk. Mr. Hayes jumped to his feet. "Objection. We have no idea what is on this drive." "It is a video," Diane said calmly. "A personal message recorded by Mr. Vance 1 month before he passed away. It was notarized on the date of its recording. It is, in effect, his final testimony." Judge Mills stared at Diane for a long moment. "Objection overruled," she said. "Play the video." The courtroom lights dimmed, and a screen descended from the ceiling. And then there he was. My Richard. He was sitting in his favorite armchair at home, looking tired, but his eyes were clear and steady. He looked directly into the camera. "Hello," he began, his voice weak but firm. "My name is Richard Vance. If you are watching this, it means I am gone, and it likely means that my son Kevin and his wife Tiffany are trying to defy my final wishes." Tiffany let out a small gasp. Richard continued, "I love my son, but I am not blind. I have seen the man he has become. I have created a separate, protected inheritance for my wife Eleanor, a woman who has been my partner and my rock for nearly 50 years. I did this with a sound mind and a clear purpose, to protect her. If anyone, especially my own son, stands up in a court of law and tries to claim that I was not in my right mind, or that my wife is delusional, then know this. They are lying. They are lying because their greed has consumed their character, Eleanor is the strongest person I know. This inheritance is hers. My love is hers. And my final wish is for her to be left in peace. He looked directly into the camera, and it felt like he was looking right at me. I love you, Eleanor, he whispered. Live beautifully. The screen went black. The courtroom was utterly silent. The only sound was a faint, choked sob from my own throat. Richard's voice, his face, his final fierce act of love. It hung in the air, an irrefutable truth. Judge Mills slowly took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked down at the documents in front of her. Then she lifted her gaze, and it landed squarely on Kevin and Tiffany. The look in her eyes was not just judicial disapproval. It was pure, unadulterated contempt. Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Do you have anything further to add? The slick lawyer was speechless. He just shook his head, his face pale. I didn't think so, the judge said. She turned her attention to my son and his wife. Mr. and Mrs. Vance. In my 20 years on this bench, I have seen a great deal of family strife, much of it driven by greed. But this, she paused, letting the weight of her words fill the room. This is a new low. You have come into this court and attempted to perpetrate a fraud. You have used your father's death and your mother's grief as tools in a disgusting and transparent attempt to steal her assets. You have wasted this court's time, and you have committed an act of profound familial cruelty. She picked up her gavel. The petition to declare Eleanor Vance incompetent is dismissed with prejudice, she declared, the legal term meaning they could never, ever file it again. Furthermore, I am ordering you to pay for all of Mrs. Vance's legal fees associated with this malicious action. Now get out of my courtroom. She banged the gavel once. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. It was over. Diane squeezed my hand under the table. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled me. We had won. Richard had won. As we were leaving, I saw them. Kevin was ashen-faced, staring at nothing. But Tiffany shot me a look of such pure, undiluted hatred it chilled me to the bone. Her plan had failed, and she would never forgive me for it. The story, however, wasn't over. As it turned out, justice has a way of moving on multiple fronts at once. The local news, always hungry for a story about the city's wealthy families, got wind of the hearing. An anonymous court clerk, disgusted by the case, had leaked Richard's video. That evening, the story was on the 11 o'clock news. Local heir attempts to have mother declared insane over secret inheritance. The segment included a clip from Richard's video. Our family's private shame was now a public spectacle. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Kevin. The investors in his high-risk downtown development project, already nervous about his erratic financial behavior, saw the report. They saw a man willing to lie in court about his own mother. They saw a man whose late father had no faith in his character. They panicked. They pulled their funding. Worse still, the public scrutiny brought the attention of financial regulators. They started digging into the development deal, and they quickly discovered that Kevin's partners were engaged in serious fraud, something a more careful businessman would have spotted. The entire project imploded overnight. The dominoes fell with brutal speed. The banks called in his loans. Creditors started filing lawsuits. The financial house of cards he had built on a foundation of debt and arrogance collapsed into a pile of rubble. He lost everything. The development deal, his investment portfolio, and of course the Lincoln Park mansion, which was so heavily mortgaged it was immediately seized by the bank. And Tiffany, the woman who had promised to stand by him in sickness and in health, as long as that sickness didn't involve being poor, she saw the writing on the wall. A week after the hearing, while Kevin was drowning in legal notices and creditor calls, she filed for divorce. She packed her designer bags, cleaned out their joint bank account, and disappeared, leaving him to face the wreckage alone. I was back in my peaceful garden in Charleston when Diane called to give me the final update. I listened quietly as she detailed the full extent of Kevin's ruin. There was no triumph in her voice, only a somber finality. He has nothing left, Eleanor, she said. Less than nothing. He's facing bankruptcy. I thanked her for everything and hung up. I sat there on my porch swing watching the sun set over the marsh, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt a sense of perfect, satisfying karma. But I didn't. All I felt was a deep, profound sadness for the little boy I had once raised, the boy who had gotten so lost somewhere along the way. That night my phone rang. It was a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the button. "Hello," I said. There was silence on the other end. Then a ragged, broken sound that was half sob, half gasp. "Mom," a voice choked out. It was a voice I barely recognized, stripped of all its arrogance and pride. "It's me, Kevin. I've lost everything." Hearing my son's voice so utterly broken sent a complicated shiver through me. It wasn't the voice of the cold stranger in the lawyer's office or the hateful petitioner in the courtroom. It was the voice of a lost child. A part of me, the mother part that never truly dies, wanted to soothe him, to tell him it would be all right. But the woman who had sat through that humiliating hearing knew better. Kindness without truth would be a disservice to us both. "Yes, Kevin," I said, my voice calm and even. "I heard." There was a long pause, filled with the sound of his ragged breathing. I don't know what to do," he stammered. "Tiffany's gone. The bank took the house. I'm staying on a friend's couch. Mom, I'm sorry. I am so sorry." The apology hung in the air. It sounded genuine, born of desperation and utter defeat. But apologies were easy. Change was hard. "Where are you?" I asked. "In Chicago," he said. "I have nowhere else to go." "I'm not in Chicago, Kevin. I'm in Charleston," I replied. I let that sink in. I was not at his beck and call. My life had a new geography. Can I come see you?" he asked, his voice small. "Please. I need to talk to my mom." I thought for a long moment. Diane Albright's voice was in my head, warning me to be careful. But Richard's voice was there too, the memory of his hope that the son we raised was still in there somewhere. "All right, Kevin," I said finally. "You can come. But I want you to understand something before you get on a plane. This is not a rescue mission. There will be no blank checks. Do you understand?" "Yes," he whispered. "I understand." He arrived 2 days later. The man who stood on my doorstep was a ghost of his former self. He had lost weight, his expensive suit was rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shame. I didn't hug him. I just led him to the chairs on my front porch. For a long time we just sat there in silence, listening to the cicadas buzz in the warm afternoon air. He was the one who finally spoke. He told me everything, not making excuses, just laying out the ugly facts of his financial ruin and Tiffany's abandonment. He talked about the hearing, about seeing his father on that screen. "When I saw that video," he said, his voice cracking, "it was like he was right there in the room looking at me. And I saw the disappointment in his eyes. He knew. All along, he knew what I'd become." He finally looked at me, his own eyes swimming with tears. "And I proved him right, didn't I? I did exactly what he was afraid of." "Yes, you did," I said softly. There was no point in lying. "So what now?" he asked, looking out at the street. "Is this it? Am I just done?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment. The future, whatever it was, would be decided right here on this porch. "No, Kevin," I said. "It's not it. But the path back is not going to be easy. If I help you, it will be on my terms. My terms, not yours. And they are not negotiable." He turned to face me, his expression a mixture of desperation and apprehension. "Anything, Mom. I'll do anything." "First," I began, my voice firm, "you will get professional help. You will start seeing a therapist, someone who specializes in behavioral finance and family dynamics. You need to understand the deep-seated issues that led you to make these choices, your relationship with money, with status, with your wife, and with me." He nodded slowly. "Okay. Second, any financial assistance from me will not go directly to you. I will establish a new, strictly controlled trust. It will cover the rent on a small, modest apartment, basic utilities, and groceries. It will not pay for fancy dinners, new clothes, or anything else. You will live on a strict budget. You will learn the difference between what you want and what you need." His jaw tightened, a flicker of his old pride showing, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Okay," he repeated. "Third, you will get a job. Any job. I don't care if it's stocking shelves at a grocery store or working in a coffee shop. You will earn a paycheck no matter how small. You need to reconnect with the dignity of work, of earning your own way. He swallowed hard. Okay. And finally, I said, leaning forward, making sure he saw the absolute resolve in my eyes. This is the most important one. You will volunteer. 2 days a week you will work at a homeless shelter. You threw me out onto the street with nowhere to go. You are going to spend your time looking into the faces of people who live that reality every single day. You are going to learn empathy, Kevin, not as a concept but as a practice. You are going to learn what it feels like to have nothing, and to serve others who have nothing. I leaned back, my terms laid out. It was a harsh prescription. It was a complete dismantling of his old life. He looked at me, his eyes wide, processing the totality of what I was demanding. I could see the war inside him. The humiliation versus the glimmer of hope. I had not offered him a handout. I had offered him a chance to rebuild himself from the ground up. After a silence that felt like an eternity, he let out a long, shuddering breath and nodded. "I'll do it, Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do whatever it takes." The months that followed were a slow, arduous process of demolition and reconstruction. Not of a building but of a man. Kevin kept his word. He moved back to Chicago and found a small one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood far from the glamour of Lincoln Park. The trust I'd set up, managed by Diane Albright's firm, paid his rent and a meager stipend for necessities. The days of tailored suits and $500 dinners were over. He found a job. It wasn't glamorous. He worked in the warehouse of a small, family-owned furniture company, unloading trucks and assembling pieces. It was hard physical labor. The first time he called me after a week of work, he sounded exhausted. He told me his hands were covered in blisters. I didn't offer sympathy. I just said, "That's the feeling of earning a day's pay, Kevin." He started therapy. At first he was resistant, cynical. He would give me brief, non-committal updates. But slowly something began to shift. He started talking about his sessions with more engagement. He talked about his crippling fear of failure, a fear that had been instilled in him from a young age. He talked about his relationship with Tiffany, realizing he had been drawn to her ambition because it mirrored his own insecurities. He started to unpack the complex knot of emotions he had towards his father, a deep desire for his approval mixed with a resentment of the high expectations he felt he could never meet. And he volunteered. Every Saturday and Sunday he was at the St. James homeless shelter, serving meals, cleaning floors, and talking to the residents. This, I think, was what changed him the most. He called me one night, his voice quiet. "I met a woman today, Mom," he said. "She was about your age. Her kids took out a reverse mortgage on her house and then kicked her out when the money ran out. She has nothing. She told me she just wants to find a safe place to sleep where she won't be cold." He paused. "That could have been you. I did that to you." "Yes, you did," I said, my voice gentle but firm. There was no accusation in it, just a statement of fact that he needed to confront. "I know," he whispered. I'm finally starting to understand." Our relationship began to change. Our weekly phone calls became less of a report and more of a real conversation. He asked about my garden in Charleston, about my friend Margaret. He told me about his coworkers at the warehouse, about the small victories of his week. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. He was learning to find value not in what he owned, but in who he was becoming. I continued to build my life in Charleston. I took up painting again, a passion I had abandoned years ago. I joined a book club with Margaret. I learned the names of the birds that visited my garden. I felt a sense of peace and purpose that I hadn't realized was missing from my life for so long. 6 months after that difficult conversation on my porch, Kevin came to visit me in Charleston again. He looked different. The exhaustion was still there, but it was the healthy fatigue of a man who works hard, not the frayed anxiety of a man on the verge of collapse. He had calluses on his hands, and he had a clarity in his eyes that I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. He didn't ask for anything. He helped me in the garden, his movements sure and strong from his warehouse job. We cooked dinner together in my small kitchen. We sat on the porch and talked until the stars came out. He told me he had been promoted at work. Not to a management position but to the head of the warehouse floor. It came with a small raise in his salary. He was genuinely proud. It was the first promotion he had ever truly earned, not one that was given to him because of his name or his father's influence. "It's not much," he said, looking at his hands, "but it's mine." "I'm proud of you, Kevin," I said, and I meant it. It was a feeling I hadn't been able to honestly have for my son in a very long time. Before he left, he hesitated at the door. "Mom," he said, "I know it's not enough. I know an apology doesn't fix what I did. But I want you to know. I'm working on it. Every day. I'm trying to be a man that you and Dad could be proud of." I walked over and for the first time since before Richard died, I gave my son a hug. He felt thinner but stronger. He hugged me back, a real heartfelt embrace. It wasn't a cure. It wasn't a magical fix. But it was a beginning. A real one. On the first anniversary of Richard's death, he came to visit again. He didn't bring flowers. Instead, he handed me a small, beautifully crafted wooden box he had made himself at the furniture shop where he worked. The box was made of dark cherry wood, sanded so smooth it felt like silk beneath my fingertips. The craftsmanship was simple but perfect. It was a tangible result of his new life, of his hard work. I opened it carefully. Inside, resting on a piece of black velvet, were the few personal items of Richard's that Kevin had managed to salvage before the bank seized everything. His old silver cufflinks, his favorite fountain pen, and his worn leather wallet. Seeing them sent a sharp, sweet pang of memory through my heart. "I kept these," Kevin said, his voice a little thick. I thought they were what I was supposed to want. The symbols of his success. But I was wrong. They're not symbols. They're just things. They belong with you." Beneath the wallet was something else. A small velvet jeweler's box. My brow furrowed in confusion. Kevin nudged it forward. "I found this in Dad's safe deposit box at the bank when I was closing his accounts. I think he wanted you to have it." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled on the satin lining, was a ring. It was a simple, elegant band of platinum, set with a continuous circle of small, brilliant diamonds. An eternity ring. Tucked underneath it was a small, folded receipt from a jeweler, dated just 1 week before Richard passed away. It was for our 50th wedding anniversary, an anniversary he never lived to see. "Oh, Richard," I whispered, the tears I thought had run dry long ago blurring my vision. Even at the very end, he was thinking of our future, of moments we would never get to share. He was still planning, still loving me. I slipped the ring onto my finger, next to the simple gold band from our wedding day. They fit together perfectly. The plain, solid gold of our beginning, and the sparkling, unbroken circle of our end. It felt like his hand was holding mine. I looked up at my son, my heart full of a complex mix of emotions. "Thank you, Kevin," I said, my voice thick with tears. "Thank you for bringing this to me." He just nodded, giving me the space for my moment. In his eyes I saw not pity, but a shared understanding of the man we had both loved and lost. We spent the rest of the day in comfortable quiet. A new peace settled between us. As he was getting ready to leave, he paused at the door. "Mom," he said, "what did you ever do with the cars?" I smiled, a genuine happy smile. "I sold 2 of them," I explained. "The Mustang and the Jaguar. They brought in a small fortune." He looked at me, a question in his eyes. "I used the money to start a foundation in your father's name," I continued. "The Richard Vance Foundation for Second Chances. It provides grants for financial literacy programs and gives direct aid to elderly people who have been victims of financial abuse or neglect. His foresight is going to protect a lot of other people now, too." Kevin's eyes welled up. "He would have liked that," he said softly. "He would have loved that." "And the Bel Air?" he asked. "The turquoise one?" "Oh, that one's mine," I said with a wink. "Every now and then on a sunny afternoon, I take it for a drive down the coastal highway, with the windows down and the old music playing. It feels like he's right there in the passenger seat next to me." After he left, I sat on my porch for a long time, the eternity ring sparkling on my finger. The journey of the past year had been the hardest of my life. I had lost my husband, been betrayed by my son, and had my entire world turned upside down. But in the wreckage, I had found something unexpected. I had found myself. Richard's true inheritance wasn't the money, or the cars or the houses. It was the chance he gave both of us. He gave me the tools to reclaim my independence and find my strength. And he gave Kevin the harsh, necessary crisis he needed to finally break free from the poisonous values that were destroying him and find his own humanity. The garage, the place I had gone to in my darkest hour, the symbol of my worthlessness in the eyes of my son, had turned out to be the key. It hadn't just unlocked a hidden fortune. It had unlocked a new life for me and a second chance for him. It had unlocked the truth. My name is Eleanor Vance and I am 69 years old. I am not a pathetic old woman. I am a survivor, a painter, a gardener, a friend, and a mother who is cautiously, hopefully, rebuilding her relationship with her son. I am a woman living beautifully, just as my husband wanted. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been hard to share, but I feel it's important. I know there are so many of you out there who have faced your own family heartbreaks and betrayals. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What's a lesson you've learned about your own strength when you needed it most? Your stories matter. If my story touched you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories of life, loss, and the incredible power of a second chance.